Okay, welcome. My name is Lauren Robinson, and I'm here from the Sandwich Public Library, and it's a pleasure to have you come out this evening. It's really a joy to be in this space. I don't know, you have to, I come into work every day, and for years I've been driving by Town Hall, and to be inside this building and to look outside these windows, it's just a beautiful, beautiful space to be. Actually, there's a member from the Friends of the Sandwich Town Hall here, and she has some membership information on the windowsill. So if anyone would like to get involved with the Friends of the Sandwich Town Hall, that could be a wonderful thing to do, because we're just so lucky to have this beautiful space. At the library, we love to have authors come. And sometimes we don't have enough space for authors, so we look for other venues, and this is one of the venues we chose tonight. We would not have access to all these authors if it were not for a wonderful collaboration that we have with Titcomb's Bookshop. I hope you all know about Titcomb's out in East Sandwich. They do wonderful work, and they help us enhance our work with our community. So I'm going to introduce Vicki Titcomb, and she's going to get us started this evening. And there are beverages in the back of the room, and we'll have some refreshments after the program. Thank you for being here.
And it is definitely a collaboration, so thank you to the Sandwich Public Library and to Lauren. So I have to tell you, I went to a conference a few years ago, maybe? 2 years ago, and where the publishers introduced like the best of their books. And this publisher talked about this amazing new book that was being published called The Passage. So, they're all trying to make us read books, and I picked up The Passage was the one that I read first, and I could not put this book down. It is unbelievable. It is amazing. And so anyways, we were really, really excited when I'm sitting at my desk and I see this email pop up and it says Justin Cronin on it. I'm like, oh my gosh, could it be? And indeed it was. We're very fortunate that Justin happens to be in the area, and I got to meet him in person after appreciating his work so much. And it really is an epic page turner. Many of you have probably read the book already, and if not, you're going to want to read it as soon as you get home. So Justin is a New Englander by birth and author of The Summer Guest and Mary and O'Neill, which won the Penn Hemingway Award and the Stephen Crane Prize. He got his MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop. Not a bad place to get an MFA, probably. And is now a professor of English at Rice University in Texas. He lives with his family. His wife is here in Houston, Texas, where it is probably, say, about as hot as it is here right now down there. A little more? Maybe as humid, too? Ye gods, that's bad. No wonder you came out with a book like The Passage. So The Passage was released in paperback this spring and named one of the 10 best books of the year, novels of the year of 2010 by Time magazine, and listed on almost every best book of the year list, including the Washington Post, Esquire, U.S. News and World Report, NPR On Point, Library Journal, Book Page, you name it. But I'd rather hear Justin talk, so I won't go on with that list. So he's going to talk about his book, and then there'll be time for you to ask questions if you'd like, and then we'll have a signing afterwards. So please help me welcome Justin Cronin. Thank you, Justin.
This is a very imposing mic. Am I using it properly? Can everybody hear me okay? All right. I didn't just happen to be here. I now am a taxpayer on Cape Cod. So I grew up in the area. My family's been coming here since 1950, and my wife and I have been renting here to get, Houston in the summer, just don't even think about it, okay? It is the hottest, most miserable place on planet Earth in the summertime. You just hide in your house and watch TV. And so we've been coming here for 10 years in the summer. And last year, in a moment of exuberant stupidity, we bought a house. So anyway, I'm very, very glad to be here. And I guess I'm what they call a wash ashore, but 1950, people. I've been here, my family's been here since 1950. All right, so I'm gonna talk a little bit. I'm gonna read a little bit, and then I want to take some questions. I've been a college teacher for a long time, and just sort of talking about a book like that is really the best way to do it. So the problem with Q&As, of course, is it produces that awkward moment right at the start when you say, are there any questions? And nobody raises their hand. So whoever asks that first question, first of all, it can't be my wife, okay? You can't be the one. And I know you're just thinking about it right now, but no. The first person who asks the question gets a Christmas card from me this year, okay? That will be your prize. Just give me your address and you get a Christmas card. All right. So what can I say about the passage? I mean, I've been on paperback tour, and by now most people kind of know what the book is and what it's about. So I'm not in some boring way going to try to repeat the plot of a 337,000 word novel. So feel relieved about that. People also many people have heard the story of how the passage came about. And if the story that you heard is the most unbelievable, I assure you that is the correct one. I did indeed write the passage to impress a girl. The most interesting things a man does in his life is usually to impress a woman, are they not? And in this case, it was my 8-year-old daughter. She's not 8 years old anymore. She is 14. Is she 14? She's 14. Yeah, thank you. My wife nodded. I can't, she's turning 50. She's 14 years old. So the little girl in the story is gone. She's 14. So that, as we know, that is the new 30. And so she's a very different sort of creature now. But back when she was 8 years old, she came to me with a very troubled look on her face. And I said, honey, cupcake, darling, what is it? What is wrong? And she said, Daddy, I'm afraid. I said, honey, what are you afraid of? And she said, I'm afraid your books are boring. And I'd written 2 novels that had done, reasonably well, and I felt very proud of them, and they were not for kids, so I didn't expect, that she would find them particularly interesting until later in life. But of course, I asked her, have you read them? And she said no, but she had looked at the covers and read the flaps. Fair criticism, I suppose. And I said, okay, what do you think I should write about? And, she thought a moment, and she said, I think you should write a story about a girl who saves the world. Which was, I confess, not exactly what I wanted to hear. The world seemed a little big. It's like maybe the girl who saves Connecticut would be the right size. But a dare is a dare, and in fact, at that time, I was working on a novel that was struggling. It had reached the quagmire of page 120. Those of you who have maybe written a novel that never got finished, it probably died around page 120, I think, because that's about as many pages as you can sort of bullshit your way through it, I found. And so I said, okay, fine, I'll do this, but you have to help me. And my daughter is an extremely bookish girl. She was then, and she remains now, a girl who, ingests a couple of books a day. Keeping her in literature is actually, sort of a big line item on my budget. I've actually seen her reading a book at her own birthday party, okay? And so I figured she would be reasonably well equipped for this, this introduction to the family business. And at that time, that fall, I was spending time with her after school. Her bike riding skills were not the best, and so I would take my afternoon run, and she would come along with me on her bicycle, which had a name written on it. It was called the Puddin'. Okay, it was the Puddin'. So she would get on the Puddin', and we would go out through my Houston neighborhood. And I was running a lot then. I was running pretty long distances, so this amounted to about an hour. And while we did this, we played a game that was essentially let's compose the plot of a novel. Let's write a novel. And we had only 2 rules to this, and the first was that anything in the book had to be interesting, which is good advice for a novelist, I think. And there's a lot of novelists, I'm afraid, who maybe could stand to hear that advice. And so if it was interesting, it went in, which is why I will tell you the book contains not 1, but 2 runaway trains. I like runaway trains. And the other rule was that I had to have 1 character with red hair, so you don't have to wonder what color hair my daughter has. And I had no intention of writing a book. I was really just having fun trying to improve a little girl's somewhat sketchy bicycle riding skills. But as it so happened, the sort of chemistry of this process over time kind of started producing something that seemed very interesting, and then became more interesting. And then my wife got involved, because I'd come home and I'd say, this is such a gas, I can't believe what we're coming up with. And by December, when the weather got cold and the bike went into the garage, we had what felt to me like a solid outline for a story. And at the time, I was still lying to myself that this other novel was alive. It was not. It had a toe tag on it. But I decided I would write down what my daughter and I had come up with. I'd taken not a single note through all this. And so I decided I would write it down to see, just, to save it for later, in some way. And I looked up about a week later, and I had 30 single-spaced pages of notes. That's what we had. And it was what we'd come up with and stuff that occurred to me as I was writing all this stuff down. And in fact, that outline was one from which I did not deviate really at all in writing the book. And so, 30 pages of notes, as a novelist, you really, you can't really ignore a present like that. But it did not have a voice yet. I didn't really know how the book would feel. So I decided I would write a chapter just to kind of see how it felt. And it felt great. And, here I am now, all these years later. Well, the night I finished the book, and you finish a book many times, actually, you kind of get through your first sort of not so great draft, but it covers the major things, and then you write a slightly better one, and then there's like 10 times when you finish a book. But the time you kind of write the last sentence, that's sort of a big moment, and typically that's always happened for me at 4 a.m, but with no one to talk to. But on this occasion, it was not. It was like the dinner hour, and I came into the house, and I said to my wife, who was making the tuna casserole or whatever it was, and I said to her, "Well, I finished." And she said, "Well, how long is it?" And I said, "It's 337,000 words. And she said, somebody likes the sound of his own voice. All right, so there it is, the passage. I've changed the section. I'm going to read a little bit from the book, and I've changed the section of the book that I tend to read to audiences such as your lovely selves, because I received my first ambush question from a reporter, or what is now known as a gotcha question, right? This occurred in Columbus, Ohio, and I had an interview scheduled with a reporter from the Salt Lake Tribune. And Salt Lake was one of the cities that I was going to visit on tour. And typically these pieces are all the same. The reporter calls, you tell them about the book, they ask you, it's really very familiar. It's the kind of thing that after a while you can do in your sleep. And so I took the phone call. And the first question out of this guy's mouth was an absolute showstopper. He said to me, "So, I just got to ask you, what do you think about the fact that Ronnie Lee Gardner was reading your book? Raise your hand if you know who Ronnie Lee Gardner is." Neither did I. And I didn't want to look like an idiot. And as it happened, I had my iPad in my lap. So I'm rapidly looking up who Ronnie Lee Gardner is. And I managed to get the spelling correct the first time. Ronnie Lee Gardner was the first death row inmate in the state of Utah to be executed by firing squad since Gary Gilmore. And he was executed last summer after being on death row for many, many, many years. And he had in fact requested that he'd sued the state to be executed by firing squad. And his explanation for this was his Mormon heritage, which called for blood atonement. So I got curious about Ronnie Lee Gardner, and so I went and I did a quick bit of research. It wasn't hard. His story was the kind of awful death row inmate story that you expect. A terrible, terrible childhood spent either being violently abused by foster parents or being incarcerated. He went on to a life of petty crime that sort of blossomed into shooting a bartender for $100. Then, as he was on his way to his arraignment, he had arranged for somebody to hide a pistol in the water fountain, and he made his first escape attempt. He was some sort of a chronic escapee, and he shot a hardworking public defender in the basement of the courthouse, for which he was sentenced to death twice. He was later sentenced to death a third time for attempting to kill another inmate in prison, although that was later overturned by the Supreme. Apparently in Utah, you can be sentenced to death for attempted murder when you are incarcerated, but no more. The Supreme Court overturned it. He was at one time the youngest sitting death row inmate in the country, and also the longest sitting death row inmate. So he's somebody who spent his entire adult life on death row. So that's who Ronnie Lee Gardner is. And those of you who know the book know that one of the major plot points is 12 death row inmates who are lured, tricked, essentially, into consigning their worldly persons to a medical experiment about which they know nothing in advance in exchange for commutation of their death sentence. So the gentleman asked me, what do you think about the fact that Ronnie Lee Gardner was reading your book? And I confess the first question in my head, and I'm glad I didn't say it because it would have sounded very glib, was, of course, well, did he finish? And when I asked my wife, she said, that was the first thing she said, too. The other question he asked me, of course, was, what do you think about the fact that your book may become a death row sensation? And I confessed I had no idea what to say to that. I was like, call me back in a month. I might be able to formulate a response to that. It was an odd thought, because I had written a book in which I had to consider the death penalty and what life was like on death row. I live in Texas, where, in fact, it's Texas, okay? We have the busiest death row in the world, I think. These things are not covered by the press. I mean, it's sort of what they do up in Huntsville. They kill people. And so I had to give this a great deal of consideration and do some research. Now, you can't really do research on death row the way you do other things. I do not have a press credential. I can't just show up at the Polunsky unit, which is where the death row for men is located in near Huntsville, Texas, and say, geez, you mind if I look around, talk to some, death row inmates and maybe have lunch with them. You can't do that. So you have to do what you can do online and and talk to people in the justice system. And as it happens, Texas publishes a lot of information online. My goal in this was to create a character who would be, I wanted to create one death row inmate. The book has got 12 in it, but I wanted to create one, and I wanted this character to, in some ways, capture the complexity of this issue. No matter how you feel about the death penalty, we all must admit that it is highly complex, right? And so I wanted a character whose humanity would be revealed in the novel. And this is a character who, those of you who read the novel will know as Anthony Carter, right? To research and create this character, which was challenging, and it's part of my job as a writer to create characters, and I think this is every writer's job, to create characters who are not like me, right? You get one autobiographical novel and that's the end of it. After that, you have to go out into the world. And there's sort of two things I've realized about this. One is you have to trust in the fact that everybody is at some level the same. We're all human beings. There's a kind of place in which we are the same. But the other is that characters who are very different from you, especially those whose experience of suffering is very different from your own, require an extra measure of care. You really got to think very carefully about them. So I wanted to research death row, and a lot was available. In Texas, they published something online, which at every reading that I've given since this phone call, I have encouraged people to look at because it is fascinating. And as I said, no matter what you think about the death penalty, it's not an easy question. In Texas, they published the last words of everybody executed in the state since 1977. And some people don't say very much, and some people give a real speech. But these are their last spoken words on earth. Inevitably, the last thing they say is, let's do this. But it's, you read this, and the only equivalent experience I can think of where somebody in full health, right, who knows they are about to die. The only other equivalent I can think of is suicide, right? So these are people in an extraordinary mortal moment, and so what they say is really quite revealing. That was one of the places that I went to kind of build this character, Anthony Carter. And the other was several other experiences that I had around Houston, not all of them journalistic. One was a homeless man that I saw every day panhandling on the freeway on-ramp at Bunker Hill and the Katy Freeway. Panhandling in Houston, which is an entirely vehicular city. I mean, I think we've got like 3 pedestrians in the entire place. Is done on freeway on-ramps. And I've actually noticed in cities this is increasingly sort of the common location for panhandling. And because panhandlers are intensely territorial, that's their on-ramp. And so you see the same person every day on your way to work. So this guy was sort of in my mind. Another character that was in my mind that became important to creating Anthony Carter was a guy who I had seen in an adjacent neighborhood. Anthony Carter is a homeless man who becomes a yard guy, okay? And in Houston, you inherit your yard guy when you buy your house, right? And my yard guy when I first moved there was Lupe, and Lupe spoke no English at all. And you know, I didn't speak enough Spanish to fire him. He was really terrible. And in the subdivisions in West Houston where we lived, you sort of there were these they were, like the panhandlers. They had distinct. Pardon me. They had distinct territories, and in this neighborhood across the street, there was a guy who I had noticed because he was very different from all the other yard guys. He did not, first of all, he was African American, which it's almost entirely, it really is entirely an Hispanic franchise. He did not arrive with a big pickup truck and 20 guys and, you know, with leaf blowers and mowers. He worked alone, and he would move through the houses of his neighborhood on an old Huffy bicycle. He was an older gentleman, on an old Huffy bicycle, pushing a lawnmower while he rode the bike, which I never tried this, but I think this is actually extremely difficult to do, wearing a big straw hat and smoking a cigar. And the one thing, the more I saw him, the more I thought, you know, wherever it is he comes from, he has to get here, right, on very busy streets, riding a bicycle, pushing a lawnmower. It was really kind of an extraordinary sight. As I learned later, and this is something that I probably knew before, but had not sort of consciously recognized the knowledge, his name was Carter, right? It was his first name, but that's where the name Carter came from in the creation of the character Anthony Carter. The last source of building this character was another web page, which a family of a death row inmate had created, and the man in question is still alive. He hasn't been executed. And it was full of pictures of him, you know, boyhood photographs, kind of the whole history of this guy. But the picture that really sunk into me was a photograph that was the one on the front page of the website that was taken from behind the plexiglass. It was taken in what are called the cages, which is where you can go and have where death row inmates are visited. You can't actually have like physical contact with the death row inmate in Texas. And I had to learn a lot of things like this, like the fact that when they get pancakes, they don't give them a fork. You know, they eat them folded up like tacos. So it was a picture taken him behind the glass. He's wearing the jumpsuit, and he's smiling. Whoever has come to visit him and is taking this photograph makes him very happy. And it was one thing that I hadn't considered was happiness on death row. And there was something about this guy. He was physically very small, and I made Anthony Carter very small. That he just didn't look like a death row inmate. Now, of course, like I went and looked up, you know, he'd done some pretty awful things, and most people on death row are in fact guilty. But at that moment that camera took his picture, he was just a man, and there was just something about him that became, in my mind, Anthony Carter. So I'm going to read in honor of this very weird phone interview I had in Columbus, Ohio, with a reporter from Salt Lake, a little section about Anthony Carter, kind of giving a bit of his backstory. I loved creating this character. I loved creating many of the characters in the passage, and those of you who know the book know that there are a lot of them. But there was something about Carter that was always really compelling to me. So anyway, I'm going to read a little bit, and then we'll ask the questions, and the first question gets a Christmas card, right? Oh, I'll say, for those of you who are perhaps unfamiliar with the story, Anthony Carter has been sentenced to death for the murder of a mother of two in a neighborhood in Houston called River Oaks, which is a kind of super wealthy, fancy neighborhood. June. It was June. He remembered that. June, the air under the freeway sizzling hot, and Carter standing in a wedge of dirty shade and holding his cardboard sign over his chest, hungry, anything will help, God bless you, had watched as the car, a black Denali, drew up to the curb. Oh, I got to stop. There's a little bit of profanity in here. I will probably just ditch it. There's some young people. There's a baby. No, I can't do it with a baby, okay? So let's see, I will substitute the word jerk for one choice bit of language, and I think that's the only one. So one time I was giving a reading, and it had some really strong language in it, and just as I was about to start, some friends of mine came, sat down in the front row with their 2 little girls, and there was no way to hide this fact, so I said, okay, everybody, I'm gonna, for a word that you will all know what this is, I'm gonna substitute the verb hug, right? And so it all went fine. All right. It was June, he remembered that, June, the air under the freeway, sizzling hot, and Carter standing in a wedge of dirty shade, holding his cardboard sign over his chest, hungry, anything will help, God bless you, had watched as the car, a black Denali, drew up to the curb. The passenger window opened, not just the usual crack so whoever was inside could pass him a few coins or a folded bill without their fingers even touching his, but gliding all the way down in a single liquid motion so that Carter's reflection in the window's dark tint fell like a curtain in reverse, like a hole had opened in the world, revealing a secret room within. The hour was just noon, the lunchtime traffic building on the surface roads and on the West Loop, which banged in a tight rhythm over his head like a long, clicking line of freight cars. Hello, the driver was calling, a woman's voice straining over the roar of cars and the echoing acoustics under the freeway. Hello there, sir. Excuse me, sir. As he stepped forward to the open window, Carter could smell the cool air of the inside of the car in his face, could smell the sweet smokiness of new leather, and then, closer, the scent of the woman's perfume. She was leaning towards the passenger window, her body straining against her seatbelt, sunglasses perched on top of her head. A white woman, of course. He'd known that even before he looked. The black Denali with its shining paint job and huge gleaming grille, the eastbound lane on San Felipe connecting the Galleria with River Oaks where the big houses were. The woman was young, though, younger than he would have thought for a car like that, 30 at the most, and wearing what looked like tennis clothes, a white skirt and top that matched, her skin moist and shining. Her arms were lean and strong and coppered by the sun. Straight hair, blonde with streaks of a darker color, pulled back from the planes of her face, her delicate nose, and well-cut cheekbones. No jewelry he could see except a ring, a diamond, fat as a tooth. He knew he shouldn't look any closer, but he couldn't stop himself. He let his eyes skim through the back of the car. He saw a baby seat, empty, with brightly colored plush toys hanging over it, and beside it a large shopping bag that was made of paper but looked like metal. The name of the store, Nordstrom, was written on the bag. Whatever you can give, Carter muttered. God bless you. The woman's purse, a fat leather satchel, was resting on her lap. She began tossing the contents onto the seat, a tube of lipstick, an address book, a tiny jewel-like phone. I want to give you something, she was saying. Would a 20 be enough? Is that what people do? I don't know. God bless you now, Carter said. The light, he knew, was about to change. Whatever you can do. She withdrew her wallet just as, behind them, they heard the first impatient honk. The woman turned her head quickly at the sound, then looked up at the traffic signal, now green. Oh, damn it, damn it. She was frantically rifling through the wallet, a huge thing the size of a book with snaps and zippers and compartments crammed with slips of paper. I don't know, she was saying, I don't know. More honking, and then with a roar, the vehicle behind her, a red Mercedes, accelerated to jam itself across the middle aisle, cutting off an SUV. The driver of the SUV slammed on his brakes and leaned on the horn. I'm sorry, the woman kept saying. She was looking at the wallet like it was a locked door she couldn't find the key to open. It's all plastic in here. I thought I had a 20, maybe it was a 10. Oh, damn it, God damn it. Hey, jerk. A man leaned his head from the window of the big pickup 2 cars back. Can't you see the light? Get out of the road. It's all right, Anthony said, backing away. You should go. You heard me? The man cried. More long blasts of the horn. He waved a bare arm out the window. Get out of the road. The woman arched her back to look into the rear view. Her eyes grew very wide. "Shut up," she cried bitterly. She hit the steering wheel with her fists. "Jesus, will you just shut up? Lady, move your car." "I wanted to give you something," she kept saying. "That's all I wanted. Why should it be so hard just to do this one thing? I wanted to help." Carter knew it was time to run. He could see how the rest was going to unfold. The car door flying open, the furious footsteps coming toward him, a man's face pressed close to his, sneering, "You bothering this lady? What do you think you're doing, fella?" And then more men. Who knew how many? There were always plenty of men when the time came, and no matter what the woman said, she wouldn't be able to help him. They'd see what they wanted to see. A black man and a white woman with a baby seat and shopping bags, her wallet open in her lap. The door of the pickup, "Please," Anthony said. "Lady, you got to go." The door of the pickup swung open, disgorging a huge red-faced man in jeans and a t-shirt with hands as big as catcher's mitts. He'd crush Carter like a bug. "Hey," he yelled. His big round belt buckle gleamed in the sun. "You there!" The woman lifted her eyes to the mirror and saw what Carter did. The man was holding a gun. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" she cried. "Hey, he's carjacking her! That little fella's stealing her car!" Carter was frozen. It was all bearing down on him, a furious roar, the whole world honking and shouting and coming to get him at last. The woman reached quickly across the passenger seat and opened the door. "Get in," she said. Still he couldn't move. "Do it," she said. "Get in the car." And for some reason, he did. He dropped his sign and got in fast and slammed the door behind him. The woman hit the gas, jumping the light, which had turned from green to red again. Cars swerved all around them as they rocketed through the intersection. For a second, Carter thought they were going to crash for sure and closed his eyes, bracing himself for the impact, but nothing happened. Everybody missed. It was, he thought, the damnedest thing. They shot out from under the freeway into sunshine again, the woman driving so fast it was like she'd forgotten he was there. They hit some railroad tracks and the Denali bounced so high he felt his head actually touch the ceiling. This seemed to jar her too. She hit the brakes too hard, sending him pitching forward against the dash, then spun the wheel and pulled into a parking lot with a dry cleaners and a Shipley's Donuts. And without looking at Anthony or saying a word to him, she dropped her head onto the steering wheel and began to cry. He'd never seen a white woman cry before, not up close, just movies and TV. In the sealed cabin of the Denali, he could smell her tears like melting wax and the clean scent of her hair. Then he realized he could smell himself too, which he hadn't done in a long time, and the smell was nothing good. It was bad, really bad, like spoiled meat and sour milk, and he looked down at his body, his dirty hands and arms, and the same t-shirt he'd worn for days and days, and he felt ashamed. After some time, the woman lifted her face up the wheel and wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "What's your name?" she said. "Anthony." For a moment, Carter wondered if maybe she was going to drive him straight to the police. The car was so clean and new, he felt like a big dirty stain sitting there, but if she could smell him, she didn't show it any. "I can get out here," Carter said. "I'm sorry I caused you trouble like I did." "You? What did you do? You didn't do anything." She took in a long breath, tilted her head back against the headrest, and closed her eyes. "Jesus, my husband's going to kill me. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. Rachel, what were you thinking?" The woman seemed angry, and Carter guessed she was waiting for him to just get out on his own. They were a few blocks north of Richmond. From there, he could catch a bus back to the place he'd been sleeping, a vacant lot on West Park beside the recycling center. It was a good spot. He'd had no trouble there, and if it rained, the people at the center let him sleep in one of the empty garages. He had a little over $10 on him, some bills and change from his morning under the 610, enough to get him home and maybe buy something to eat. He put his hand on the door. "No," the woman said quickly, "don't go." She turned toward him. Her eyes, puffy from crying, searched his face. "You have to tell me if you meant it." Carter drew a blank. "Ma'am?" What you wrote on the sign, what you said, God bless you. I heard you say it. Because the thing is, the woman said, I don't feel blessed, Anthony. She gave a haunted laugh, showing a row of tiny teeth. Isn't that strange? I should, but I just don't. I feel awful. I feel awful all the time. Carter didn't know what to say. How could a white lady like her feel awful? In the corner of his eye, he could see the empty baby seat in back with its bright array of toys, and he wondered where the child was now. Maybe he should say something about her having a baby, how nice that must be for her. Folks liked having babies in his experience, women especially. It doesn't matter, the woman said. She was staring out the window toward the donut shop. I know what you're thinking. You don't have to say anything. I probably just seem like some crazy woman. You seem all right to me. She laughed again bitterly. Well, that's just it, isn't it? That's the thing. I seem all right. You can ask anybody. Rachel Wood has everything a person could want. Rachel Wood seems perfectly all right. For another minute, they just sat there, the woman quietly crying, staring into space, Carter still wondering if he should just get out of the car. But the lady was upset, and it felt wrong to leave her like that. He wondered if she wanted him to feel sorry for her. Rachel Wood. He guessed that was her name, that she was talking about herself, but he couldn't say for sure. Maybe Rachel Wood was a friend of hers or somebody who was looking after the baby. He knew he'd have to get out sooner or later. Whatever mood had taken her would pass, and she'd figure she'd just about gotten herself shot. But for the moment, the cool air on his face from the dashboard vents and the woman's strange, sad silence were enough to keep him where he was. What's your last name, Anthony? She asked. The question wasn't one he could remember anybody asking him. Carter, he said. What she did next surprised him more than anything that had happened so far. She turned in her seat and, looking right at him, offered him her hand to shake. Well, she said, how do you do, Mr. Carter? I'm Rachel Wood. Mr. Carter, he liked that. Her hand was small, but she shook like a man, her grip strong. He felt, but he couldn't think of the words for it. He watched to see if she'd wipe her hand off, but she made no move to do this. Oh my God, she said suddenly. My husband's going to have a heart attack. You can't tell him about what happened back there. I mean it. You absolutely can't. Carter shook his head. I mean, it's not his fault he's such a complete and total asshole. He just wouldn't understand it the way we do. You have to promise, Mr. Carter. I won't say nothing. Good. She nodded briskly, satisfied, and pointed her eyes out the windshield again, her smooth brow furrowing thoughtfully. Donuts. Now, I don't know why I stopped here, of all places. You probably don't want donuts, do you? Just the word made a blast of saliva wash down the insides of his mouth. He felt his stomach growl. Donuts is all right, Carter said. The coffee's good. But they're not a real meal, are they? She said. Her voice was firm. She had decided something. A real meal is what you need. That was when Carter realized what the feeling was. He felt seen, like all along he'd been a ghost without knowing it. It came to him all of a sudden that the woman meant to take him with her, take him home. He'd heard about folks like her, but never believed it. You know, Mr. Carter, she said, I think God put you under that freeway today for a reason. I think he was trying to tell me something. She put the Denali in gear. You and I are going to be friends. I can just feel it. And I will stop there.